Bright Tuty. Every student matters.
Here we have learnt about how Gandhiji he came here in India, how this Gandhian era it started with the coming up of Gandhiji in Indian politics, actively participating in it, and so on. Now later on we are going to discuss about the various movements that were launched under the leadership of Gandhiji, the mass movement that we will learn now. Okay, and we will try to differentiate it from the period that existed there before the Gandhian era. Now coming to the question section here students, we have a question that says, when did Gandhiji enter Indian politics and what were the two new weapons he used in the struggle for independence? Now what are you going to answer in this question? Are you going to say 1915? No students. The correct answer here is 1917 when he visited Champaran, and this was the first Satyagraha movement that he organized in Champaran, Bihar. Okay. Now what were the two new weapons? Did I tell you about Satyagraha? Yes. So truth and non-violence, according to him, was the best weapons that he used again for the struggle of independence. Right? Mention the two aims of non-cooperation movement. How are you going to answer this question? Do you remember the two aims, students? Yes. The first one was to fight for the wrongdoings that happened in Punjab and Turkey. This is what I've told you, right? And the second was for the aim of Swaraj, that is self-rule and self-government. These were the two aims of non-cooperation movement. So this is how you have to answer this question here. The second question here is, how did the national movement become mass movement after 1990? So how are you going to answer this question, students? Here you have to mention a bit about the situation before the Gandhian era, right? So I'm just giving you the key points here. Now before the Gandhian era, what happened? There was a situation where we see that conflicts between different Congress leaders, moderates, extremists. So there was a chaotic situation in our country, a period of turmoil. But after the Gandhian era, what happened? So after the Gandhian era, people now saw Gandhiji as a mass leader. Now when Gandhiji he came to India, he participated in Indian politics. And when he participated in the Indian politics, he went on to meet people in different parts of the country, and in 1917, 1918, he organized satyagrahas at different places. You can mention that as well. But it was only 1919, after the Rowlatt Act was passed, that Gandhiji he called for a nationwide hartal, in which people from different areas across the country they participated in this hartal, in this Rowlatt Satyagraha, and eventually they fought in the non-cooperation movement. So here you have to mention a bit about all these parts, talking about the Rowlatt Act, how people they all together they participated here, and in non-cooperation, how this glorified the Hindu-Muslim unity and brought all the people together, and it became a mass movement, right? It was not just secluded to one area, one particular region, but it was about the whole country now, fighting for Swaraj, fighting for self-rule and self-government. Why did the Indian National Congress got its goal from Swaraj to Poon Swaraj, changed or shifted its goal? It should be shifted its goal from Swaraj to Poon Swaraj. Now, like I explained you, that the Indian leaders, keeping in mind the exploitative nature of the British government, they decided to call for complete independence rather than for self-rule. So here you have to first understand the difference between Swaraj and Poon Swaraj. Poon Swaraj does not involve British government at all. It calls for complete independence. Here we have the British Dominion, right? Dominion status. That again we will learn somewhere, right? So basically under the British Dominion, we should have self-rule, self-government or home rule, right? But complete independence, it means that freedom from the foreign rule from the British government completely. So therefore, now looking at the situation, the repressive measures that were taken by the British government, the way that people were restricted, the acts that were passed, it all initiated for the aim of Purna Swaraj, that is complete independence. This is how you have to answer this question here, okay? The famous Dandi March of Gandhiji began on 12th April 1930, 22nd April 1930, 1st April 1930 or none of the above. Now, do you remember what we have learned here when we are talking about the famous Dandi March, students? 12th April, is this the correct answer? No, you might get confused, but if you remember, we talked about 12th March 1930 when the movement it officially started, and it was on 6th April that Gandhiji he broke the salt law. So therefore the correct answer here it should be none of the above. Now second question here is Mahatma Gandhi found salt a powerful symbol that could unite the nation. Explain. Now this was the exact statement that I gave you, that Gandhiji he found in salt a powerful symbol that could unite the nation. Now how are we going to explain this? All the points that I have mentioned to you students. So here I am going to give you the keywords as in how you have to frame this answer. Now here we see that Gandhiji he stated that salt was a common ingredient that was used in food, okay? It was consumed by everyone, be it the Hindus, Muslims, rich or poor. So, he found that salt law showed the exploitative nature of the British government. The most repressive measure that the British government could ever take was imposing tax on salt that was consumed by everyone on daily basis, right? And that could connect all the people who are consuming salt because they had to pay heavy taxes, heavy dues on salt, right? They could not manufacture salt on their own because the British government had the monopoly. Monopoly, it means that the sole right was in the hands of the British government. Okay, students? So, in very layman's language, you have to understand it like this. Now, paying on the salt tax, it was the repressive measure of the British government, and Gandhiji, in the situation that was there in 1930, he thought that salt would become one of the powerful symbols here to stabilize the unity of the people, common people, be it the Hindus and Muslims, and they could come together to fight for a common cause. So this is how you have to answer this question. And in the wake of this, he demanded for the abolition of salt tax to Viceroy Lord Irwin, who refused to fulfill his demands. And in the wake of that, he launched the famous civil disobedience movement. Okay, so you have to frame your answer like this. Mention these keywords, the key points that I've talked about here. Now students, let's have a look at the questions here. So the first question here, it says, the slogan do or die was given to the nation by, and the options are Bhagat Singh, V.D. Savarkar, Mahatma Gandhi and Ras Bihari Bose. So what should be the correct answer here? Obviously students, in Quit India movement, we know that it was Mahatma Gandhi who raised the slogan, do or die, right? So the correct answer here is C, Mahatma Gandhi. The next question here is, describe the main features of the Quit India movement. Now, when we are talking about the Quit India movement, first and foremost thing that you have to write is that when this movement started, right? So, it was in the year 1942 when All India Congress Committee it was formed in Bombay, where the call for Quit India movement it took place there, right? So, we have to talk about how Gandhiji he then raised the slogan of do or die, because by now students we all know that Indians wanted complete independence, and he knew that it was only Gandhiji here he means Gandhiji, he knew that it was only possible when they are going to expel the British from the country, right? So therefore, this movement was launched that was known as Quit India movement. Now, what are some of the main features here? We see that thousands and thousands of workers, followers, top political leaders, they participated in the movement. And it was in this process only that when the movement started, Gandhiji along with many other important leaders such as Jawaharlal Nehru and many others like Sardar Patel, they all were arrested and they were kept in jail. But it was in due process that many local leaders in different regions, they participated and the movement, it took a violent turn. See, I am mentioning the keywords here, students. Now, you have to form the answer like I am telling you. You have to talk about when the movement, it started, when Gandhiji, he raised the slogan, and how many people they participated in the movement. This is an important feature. Then you have to talk about all the political leaders who went to jail, who were arrested, right? But still, under the leadership of local leaders and some other important leaders, the movement, it took a violent turn. Now, this was the movement, the last mass uprising movement that took place against the British government. Yes, students. Now, the most important feature here is that this was the last mass uprising movement that took place in our country before India got independent. Because after that, many plans and also the people, the political leaders and the British government, they were trying to come to an agreement, negotiations were taking place and so on, things were happening. But no large-scale movement took place after the Quit India movement. It was only the partition that happened after Quit India movement, right, in the year 1947. Now, students, these are some of the points that you have to mention. Then we can also talk about that British government, they also took repressive measures. They tried to suppress the movement. Around 70,000 people, they were arrested, they were kept in jail, right? They also started lathi charges, and apart from that, people were flogged, they were fired at, and so many things, they became the daily basis activities in our country. So this is how you have to mention the features of the Quit India movement. The next question here is, now students, this is a question that I put at the end of this topic here, right, this chapter here. Why? Because throughout the chapter, we have talked about the involvement of Mahatma Gandhi in Indian politics, right? So here, this is the question that summarizes all the points that we have read here. Now, give an estimate of Gandhiji's role in India's struggle for freedom. Now, how are you going to answer this question? In this question, students, you have to mention the role of Mahatma Gandhi. The question demands this part here, right? Gandhiji's role. Now, we all know that it was in the year 1950, January, that Gandhiji, he returned back to India from South Africa. returned back to India from South Africa. Now when Gandhiji he came to India, students, what was the situation here? People, they needed a mass leader. They were looking for a leader who was very much affirmative in his actions, and also he was able to lead them in a positive direction. Because before that we were talking about the division between the moderates, extremists and the chaotic situation, the turmoil that was there in the Indian politics. Correct or not? Yes. So when Gandhiji he came to India, he was a hope for all the Indians, for all the common people who were eager to challenge the British government, but they had no unified leadership there. Correct? So when Gandhiji he came to India, it was in the year 1917 with the Champaran Satyagraha that he entered the Indian politics. Correct or not, students? Yes, we have talked about it. Now, when we are talking about 1970, then you should also mention about 1918 when he launched the Kheda Satyagraha and the Ahmedabad strikes, right? Kheda and Ahmedabad, he also went to Kheda and Ahmedabad. Now, apart from that, what was happening here? Here we see that it was in 1919 with the Rowlatt Satyagraha that Gandhiji, he led a mass movement in the country that was not known before. Yes, students. Now, this is a very important point that you have to mention here. When we are talking about Satyagraha, we should also talk about the emphasis that Gandhiji had laid on Satyagraha, right? The practice that he followed in South Africa as well. And here how he emphasized on non-violence and following the path of truth. Following the path of truth. Correct? We have to emphasize on these points as well. Then we have to talk about the non-cooperation movement, then civil disobedience movement, and lastly the Quit India movement. All these movements that were launched under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi. Okay, so here we can mention the Gandhiji's role like this. First talk about when he arrived in India, then talk about the initial movement, the initial satyagrahas that were launched, talk about his ideologies on satyagraha that I've already mentioned to you. Satyagraha, it means holding on to the truth, right? Firmly holding on to the truth. So basically non-violence and truth, these were the two important weapons of Gandhiji, and how he became Mahatma, how he became people's leader here, right? So these are the points that we have to talk about, and do not forget to mention about the movements that were launched by Gandhiji himself. Non-cooperation, civil disobedience, and last but not the least, Quit India movement. Now students, here we have completed this chapter of Indian national movement where we have discussed a lot of points. We have talked about the situation of our country, the First World War. We have mentioned a bit about the war. I mentioned in the beginning. We have also talked about the colonialism, how this anti-colonial feelings it generated in the people, how this nationalism it rose in our country, and also we have talked about the arrival of Gandhiji in India, and further we have discussed about the non-cooperation movement, civil disobedience movement, and Quit India movement. Okay, so I hope that you have understood the whole chapter. Thank you very much.